Have you ever been tempted to just rely on yourself rather than the Lord? It is a real temptation, isn't it? I mean, after all, we live in a very physical, hands on, five senses world, and all we know is our own capabilities. And so when we become a person of faith, we are invited, we are encouraged, we are commanded to trust the Lord, to let Him lead us, to let Him direct us. And do you ever find yourself thinking, oh, I've got to work harder, or I've got to make this happen, I've got to figure out how to do this? It is human nature. So if you are one of those people, you are not alone. We've all been there. And so, how does it work? How do we really trust the Lord? How do we rely on the Lord? How do we rely on Him for what we need? Well, today we are discussing that. So, stay with me and let's discuss. Faith habits connect your everyday behaviors with your belief system. Rather than letting the pressures and popularity of this world define you, the Faith Habit Show for Success will keep you focused on God's priorities for your life. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Lisa Toney. Well, a couple of months ago, I had a very unexpected thing happen. I was out with my husband. We were having dinner out for a date night, and we ate some food, and then we were going to a movie. And I started not feeling so well, but I kind of thought I just maybe ate bad food. But my husband had eaten the same thing, and it didn't bother him. So I wondered, all right, well, maybe I'd been not eating a lot of gluten, and I had some gluten, so maybe that was it. Who knows? So we went to the movie and still not feeling well. Went home. I did some like Tums and ginger ale, still not feeling well. Went to bed, and I really did not sleep all night very well. I just was uncomfortable. My stomach hurt. But I got up in the morning and I took some Tylenol and just was back at it. We had a busy day, had a soccer game, had a birthday party. We had a going away party for some friends. So it just kind of was rolling through my day and just taking pain meds to kind of manage my upset stomach and keep drinking ginger ale and Tums. Well, we were finally at this party in the evening, and my stomach pain was just getting worse and worse and worse. And so I just got so uncomfortable. I'm like, I've got to leave. So I got my kids and we started heading home, and things were very much intensifying. And I called my husband and I was like, oh, I've got to go into the urgent care. And he's like, urgent care is closed. So by the time we got home, I was in tears, and he took me to the emergency room. That was what was open. And we waited and went through all these tests and finally discovered that my appendix was done. It was no longer living its best life and needed to come out. And so just went through this whole process, and then was in the hospital all weekend waiting for a surgeon to do surgery. Had the surgery, and then the incision got infected. Oh man, it's been a whole thing. And so, I was going through this season of not being able to do all the things I normally do and needing to rely on other people and also needing to rely on the Lord. And do you know that verse that is in Proverbs? It's such a great one. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. It's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And that is such a powerful verse to remind us to trust in the Lord and lean not on our own understanding. And sometimes when we end up in situations where, like especially a physical illness where you are completely dependent on other people, you cannot do anything in your and of yourself. Like I could not remove my own appendix. I would have tried if I could have. I pretty much felt like I was in labor with no baby. I'm like, come on, where's the epidural? I would really like one. And they would not give me an epidural for my appendix. So, it had to rely on the surgeons and the experts in that field. And so, the idea of relying upon God in our own lives rather than leaning on our own understanding, like our own ability, it's a tough one for us as followers of Jesus, because what does that look like? What does that really mean? One of my mentors says, Lisa, you got to frog it, fully rely on God. So whenever I'm tempted to take things into my own hands, my own control, I'm always reminded by that. Frog it, gotta frog it. Fully rely on God. So what does that look like to fully rely on God? I've been thinking about that lately. And, I keep coming back to the idea of really trusting his promises. Like we've got to read them and we've got to pray them and we've got to think them and we've got to say them, but we've really got to like lean into those promises as being real. Like I believe those promises for me. I believe that I can trust in the Lord. I believe that I can lean into him. I believe in all my ways he can direct me. Like I have to believe those promises to be true. And so I think sometimes we end up, especially the older we get, maybe a little cynical, maybe a little doubtful, maybe a little bit like, I do believe in God, but I'm going to give him a little bit of help, And so what that means is reminding our minds and our hearts, our whole being, that we believe the promises of God to be true. And that's why I'm such a big fan of not only reading them, but writing them and saying them and spending time with them and repeating them, because it takes me a while to get it through my skull, my brain, that what those promises are and that they are reliable, that God has been with me, that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever, that he has been faithful. His timing is not mine, but I can trust his timing, and that he is a good God. And so I've got to claim those promises as real and believe those. And that helps me to rely on God. That helps me to lean into him and trust him. And the other thing that we have to do is be so honest with God. Like we just have to get in there and say every nitty gritty detail and be specific in our language with God. Not just hey, God, help me, but God, help me through this particular situation. When I was going through my appendectomy, I needed to ask God to help me in the hospital with a roommate that was not an encouraging person. I was like trying to figure out how to navigate that. Like, oh my goodness, how do I navigate all these weird noises and sounds that are coming out of this person? And um, their language was very coarse and grating, and this person was very inconsiderate and very loud, and oh goodness, it was so hard. And I wasn't feeling well, and I didn't have anybody there with me. I was by myself, and all these things. And so like, oh, how do I trust the Lord in this difficult circumstance? How do I ask Jesus to help me get through this moment? How do I rely on the Lord? How do I frog it? Fully rely on God. And part of that is just reminding ourselves that it's not in and of ourselves, that God can bring a new idea to mind, that God can bring a new situation into play. God can have timing aligned differently than what is our timing. And so fully relying on God is about acknowledging his presence and his reality, and saying, I believe that God is real and that God is present and that God can help me and will help me. And I think when we get into that mindset and we remind ourselves through prayer and scripture and talking to each other, like, God's got this. And that's one of the powerful things that we can do as fellow believers with one another, is remind one another that God has got this, that God's timing is not our own, that we need to keep trusting in the Lord, that we can rely on God. God is worthy of our trust. And when we acknowledge that, even in the midst of all our cynicism about maybe politicians or the economy or the state of ethics in our world today, that God is still reliable, that we can still trust in who he is and who he calls us to be. So my invitation to you today is to frog it, fully rely on God. And I want to give you something just to help you do that. I've got a handout for you that reminds you how to rely on God with the promises of God that I want you to claim and trust in your life. So you can go and get this for free at lisatoney.com/rely. And this is just a way to rely on God, and it teaches you the frog it method, how to fully rely on God. So I hope that you get this and spend some time praying it through and thinking about it. And that just becomes a reminder to you to frog it when you don't know what to do, to fully rely on God.
Easy, intentional, and powerful. Faith habits. Get your free Power Up prayer guide today at lisatoney.com/powerup. Thanks so much for joining me today on Faith Habits for Success. Here's to good faith habits, my friend. Be strong and courageous and stand firm in your faith. See you next time. Bye for now.